So, India Reloaded is a book which is located in the changes that India has gone through in the last about 5 6 years, last decade of the Indian economy. And the reason to write this book is that there is a lot of coding of India from a historical perspective. So there's a lot of writing in terms of what went around in India historically, and even there's a lot of coding of India around the time of economic liberalization and how India is opening up and stuff like that. But there's tremendous amount of change that India has gone through, both as a culture and as a consumption behavior in last about decade or so. And there's very little thinking, or there's very little coding of that thinking which has been put in terms of a literary piece of work. And therefore India Reloaded tries to look at some of the assumptions, some of the myths that we've been living with about India as a culture and about Indians as consumers, and it tries to bust them. Yeah, I mean, there is a distinction from the perspective that, so for example, let me give you an example. I mean, around 1990s, there was this whole big myth of 350 million middle class India. We said India is a market of 1.2 billion people. You know, we said we are a market of 600 million people who are in the bottom of the pyramid. And in last 2 decades, you've learned that in fact all of that chase was a wrong chase. It was a hoax. I mean, there aren't 350 million middle class in India. So for example, I went back to the census of India, which is the last census was 2011. And if you look at the census of India, there are 600 million people in India who do not have access to toilets and clean drinking water. Now, they cannot be in the consuming class. If you look at ownership of cars, there are only 56 million people who own cars in India. So the middle class size cannot be 350 million by any imagination. So this was a wrong chase that we were sent on around the economic liberalization of the country. And now a lot of businesses are realizing, because they've spread themselves far too thin. So if you're a telecom company, you've gone to the most rural, most back-end part of the country, put up a tower there, you've reduced your tariffs to bare minimum, you're against the wall on tariffs, you're pretty much bleeding in trying to attract the 300 million middle class or 1.2 billion population. And there's no profitability in that business. And telecom is just one example. There are so many companies who've spread themselves thin trying to attract the consumer, which never existed. So these are some of the myths which were seeded around the economic liberalization of the country and have continued, and therefore they need busting. Of course, there are lots of positive trends. So, for example, I mean, the other insight in the book, or the other idea in the book, is that when we talk about India, we talk a lot about India's diversity. So, as consultants, we make a big deal. India is a very diverse country. There are 28 states, there are 2,000 dialects, and culture changes every 100 kilometers in India. And there's so many Indias in this India. But from a marketing perspective, and even from a social perspective, I think what divides us is far less important than what unites us, right? So if you look at from a culture perspective, I give an example that dosa has now become a national snack. You can find dosa stalls as much in Bihar and UP, as much in Andhra and Tamil Nadu. I mean, North Indian cuisine, for example, is doing so well in Bangalore, right? I mean, so cultural ideas, Rajnikant is a national icon. He's not just a South Indian icon. A.R. Rahman is India's asset, So I think from a culture perspective, what popular culture is doing is that it's taking the regionalism, it's taking the differentness of India, and it's building a national popular culture which is more united than it is divided. And this national popular culture is textured, it's informed by the differentness of various regions of the country. So to my mind, this unity of India is worth far more to talk about, whether it's from marketing perspective or business perspective or from a national interest, than the diversity of India. But in last about 2 decades, all that we've done is made a big deal about the differentness and not the unity of India. So the book has about 10 chapters, and each of the chapters take up a insight or an observation or hypothesis about how India behaves from a culture perspective, and how we can use that behavior from a marketing and business vantage point. The book across the chapters coalesces observations from macroeconomics, from politics, from consumption behavior, from cultural anecdotes, from Bollywood, from music, to sort of support the hypothesis. So these are all data points that I use to either provoke or prove a certain cultural hypothesis about India. Yeah, they totally do. I mean, for example, one of the ideas in the book is that, I mean, if you look at, for example, the Western model, there's a model of Maslow's hierarchy, which says that the people at the bottom of the pyramid, who are the poor people, they should only worry about food, drinking, and basics of life. And as you move up the ladder, as you become richer, is when you seek self-actualization. But if you look at a country like India, it's the poor who want purpose, right? It's the poor who want yoga, it's the poor who want the religion. When there was India against corruption happening, it was the poor people who were on the roads protesting for a better, cleaner India. So how culture behaves impacts what people desire in life. So Dhanteras, for example, in India is a cultural idea. It's a tradition. But you go out and buy gold, or you go out and buy metal around Dhanteras. So I think in India we consume through the window of culture much more than we consume merely through the window of basic needs. So I mean, if you look at the business and management and even marketing thinking thus far in India, it's all inspired by largely Western management concepts. There have been talks of saying that how Indian indigenous thinking is far superior, works better in the Indian markets. There have been conversations around globalization, etc. But there hasn't been enough coding of what works better in India than the theories which have been developed in the West. So take for instance the idea of Maslow's hierarchy theory, right? I mean, Maslow says that people at the bottom of the sort of pyramid, they should care only for food, clothing and water. And only when you go up the hierarchy and when you become rich is when you should look for self-actualization. But if you look at a market like India, it's the poor who want purpose, it's the poor who want spiritualism, it's the poor who are buying products driven by yoga and Ayurveda. So the Indian behavior from a culture point of view and also from a consumption point of view sort of busts the Western model here. Similarly, for example, West is going gaga about the idea of jugaad and about frugal innovation, about how you can strip down products and services and make it available to poor people. But our learning from the Indian market is that poor people do not want stripped down products and services. Poor people want real products and services. They don't want cheap looking things. They want sexy looking things. They want aspirational stuff. So there's a huge need for marketing, business and management thinking which comes India down and doesn't sort of blatantly copy all the models of the West, because the Western models were developed for a certain kind of a audience at a certain point in time which may not correlate exactly to where India is. So India Reloaded takes up the cause of India and thinking about India up rather than West down. You can see the idea of middle class in India is conceptual, right? Because that's again a coping mechanism, because nobody wanted to call themselves rich and nobody wanted to call themselves poor. So you ask anybody in India, they'll say, oh, I'm a middle class. So middle class really isn't a hard definition in India. It's a mindset. It's a veneer to hide behind. It's a modesty tool rather than anything else. What I was referring to was the Western ideal of saying that India is a big bottom of the pyramid market, and it's a market which is driven more by affordability. So let's make cheap products, no matter how thin or how stripped down they are, and try and sell them to these people, right? And that's where I refer to them as poor in context to the Western mindset. If you look at it from an Indian mindset, they are actually upgrade class, as I would call them. They are the aspirers. They want to upgrade in life. They want to get better in everything, in education, in entertainment, in mobile phones and everything else. So the other idea is that why businesses and brands in India need to have a socio-capitalist view of the market. So you cannot come to a market like India and say, oh, there's so much business out there, let's just skim and get away from it. I think in India, businesses need to have a social purpose. You need to be part of the social fabric and help build the society, help add back to the society and grow with it rather than come from a point of view of just skimming it, right? I mean, the other day, for example, at a conference that I was speaking, there was this business head from a DTH service provider, and his issue was that in most of India there is power cut and there is electricity cut, and therefore people aren't watching enough television, and therefore the average revenue per user is going down. Now, I would say that rather than crib about a situation like this, what if you were to bundle a solar cell with your DTH service, or what if you were to try to create a community power generation system around your product? So I think businesses need to have a slightly social point of view for them to be successful in a country like India, because unlike say West, where bulk of the population is above the poverty line and only a small minority sort of needs helping, in India all of us need helping. In India everybody needs upliftment. So it's important that businesses and brands are part of the fabric. That's one of the ideas. The other idea is of late there's been huge hue and cry about whether government policy is supporting business, whether the India growth story is going to exist, not exist, and it's been continuing for last good 5 years from the previous government to the current government. And while the government continues to make efforts and try to create an environment for business to be able to do things easily, my hypothesis is that India growth story is intact because it's driven by people rather than policies. So if you look at the success of India thus far, it's powered by the ambitions and the abilities and the hard work of millions of Indians. And that's the power that nobody can take away from India. It's not a growth story projected by state manipulated numbers. And therefore, I think the power of the people powering the growth story of India makes it far more sustainable than say any power of policy or state governance. Yeah, so as my day job, my job is to understand people, and my job is to understand culture and bring brands and marketing and business to use the understanding of culture and how people are changing. So that's my everyday job. So I do that for a living on a daily basis. So a part of the research happens on ground when I'm working with marketers, when I'm working with brands and businesses and helping them understand how people are changing in the country and how they are consuming. My theory also is that people consume entertainment, products and services, politics, and even cultural ideas through similar windows, really. So that becomes a lot of fodder for my thinking. But at the same time, I do a lot of popular culture analysis. So I try and understand if a certain cinema is doing well, why is that narrative doing well? If certain kind of music is doing well, why is that doing well? And then you try and throw it against some data points. So you throw it against some category data points in terms of why are certain brands doing better than other brands, why are certain categories doing better than other categories. So it's a mixture of data points, a mixture of cultural mapping, and a mixture of observations from daily life.